On a sun-drenched morning in early September 2001, the world was blissfully unaware of the impending chaos. The United States, a nation defined by its ideals of freedom and democracy, hummed with the rhythm of everyday life. Children played in parks, families gathered for weekend barbecues, and a sense of security enveloped the country. Little did they know that this tranquility would soon be shattered by an unprecedented act of terror. On September 11, 2001, tragedy struck as 4 commercial airplanes were hijacked by terrorists associated with Al-Qaeda. 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City, another hit the Pentagon, and the 4th, United Flight 93, was brought down by brave passengers in Pennsylvania. The attacks claimed nearly 3,000 lives and left the nation reeling in shock and grief. It was a wake-up call that would lead the US down a path of war and fear, fundamentally altering its approach to security and human rights. Chapter 2. The War on Terror begins. In the wake of the attacks, President George W. Bush declared a war on terror, vowing to dismantle terrorist organizations and prevent future attacks. A military operation was launched against the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had been harboring Osama bin Laden and his followers. But as the US military engaged in combat, a new dilemma emerged: what to do with captured enemies. On November 13, 2001, President Bush signed a military order permitting the indefinite detention of foreign nationals without charge. This order marked the beginning of a controversial chapter in American history. The US government claimed that these detainees were illegal enemy combatants, and thus not entitled to the protections of the US Constitution or the Geneva Conventions. The legal landscape shifted dramatically as detainees were stripped of their rights to challenge their detention. Chapter 3. The birth of Guantanamo Bay. In January 2002, the US established the Guantanamo Bay detention camp within the naval station Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The temporary facility, known as Camp Tenri, was hastily constructed to house suspected terrorists captured in Afghanistan. The camp quickly became a symbol of the US government's controversial approach to counter-terrorism. Initially, the camp held approximately 200 detainees, many of whom had been captured in battlefield operations. The detainees came from diverse backgrounds, hailing from over 48 countries. As the number of prisoners swelled, the facility transformed into a more permanent detention center, and by May 2003, it housed over 680 individuals, most of whom were held without formal charges. Chapter 4. Legal battles and human rights concerns. As reports of the camp's conditions began to surface, the world watched in horror. Detainees were subjected to harsh treatment, including solitary confinement, psychological torture, and so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. The International Committee of the Red Cross and numerous human rights organizations raised alarms about the mistreatment of detainees. In 2004, a landmark Supreme Court case, Rasool v. Bush, ruled that federal courts had jurisdiction to hear habeas corpus petitions from Guantanamo detainees. This decision marked a significant turning point, granting some legal rights to the detainees. Yet the US government maintained that it was not obligated to follow the protections afforded by the Constitution or the Geneva Conventions. Chapter 5. The struggle for closure. As the years passed, the political landscape surrounding Guantanamo began to shift. In early 2005, President Bush acknowledged the need for closure, but faced political opposition from both sides of the aisle. The detainee population began to decline as the administration released or transferred around 540 individuals, but the camp remained operational. In 2009, President Barack Obama took office with a promise to close Guantanamo Bay within a year. He issued executive orders aimed at finding lawful alternatives for the detainees. However, fierce bipartisan opposition in Congress stymied his efforts, citing concerns over national security. During Obama's administration, the number of detainees was reduced from about 250 to 41. But the military tribunals remained in place, raising questions about their fairness and transparency. Chapter 6. A new era of detention. When Donald Trump assumed the presidency in 2017, he took a decidedly different approach. He signed an executive order to keep Guantanamo Bay open indefinitely, marking a return to a more hardline stance on terrorism. During his administration, only one prisoner was repatriated, and the facility's future remained uncertain. As of January 2025, the camp housed 15 detainees, 3 awaiting transfer, 9 charged or convicted of war crimes, and 3 held in indefinite detention without facing tribunal charges. The camp's legacy of controversy continued to cast a long shadow over the U.S. legal system and its commitment to human rights. Chapter 7. The detainees' stories. Among the detainees were individuals with harrowing stories. One such detainee, Muhammad, was a former Afghan farmer who had been caught in the crossfire during the U.S. invasion. He was captured by Afghan forces and sold to the Americans for a bounty. Held in Guantanamo for years, he struggled to maintain his sanity amidst the isolation and uncertainty. Another detainee, Ahmed, was a Pakistani national who had traveled to Afghanistan to help rebuild communities devastated by war. Mistaken for a terrorist, he was arrested and shipped to Guantanamo, where he languished in a legal limbo. His dreams of helping others turned into nightmares of confinement and despair. Chapter 8. International outcry and efforts for change. Over the years, international organizations, including Amnesty International and the United Nations, condemned the practices at Guantanamo Bay. Activists rallied for the closure of the camp, highlighting the violations of human rights and the lack of due process. The debate over Guantanamo became emblematic of broader discussions about national security, civil liberties, and the balance between safety and justice. The Biden administration, which took office in 2021, vowed to close the camp before the end of its term. However, it continued to allocate funding for military court expansions and facility upgrades, raising questions about the sincerity of its intentions. Chapter 9. The future of Guantanamo Bay. On January 29, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order to expand the Guantanamo facility to accommodate up to 30,000 migrants under detention, separate from the military prison. The move was met with criticism and fear, as many wondered whether this would further entrench the U.S. in policies of indefinite detention without due process. As the world looked on, Guantanamo Bay remained a contentious symbol of America's struggle to reconcile its principles with the realities of modern warfare and terrorism. The stories of the detainees echoed the complexities of justice and the challenges of a legal system grappling with the legacies of fear and conflict. Epilogue. A call for reflection. Guantanamo Bay stands as a poignant reminder of the moral dilemmas faced by nations in times of crisis. The stories of those who have languished there, marked by pain, uncertainty, and a yearning for justice, urge us to reflect on the essence of our humanity. In the quest for security, it is vital that we do not lose sight of the values that define us. As the world continues to grapple with terrorism and its consequences, the lessons learned from Guantanamo must guide us towards a more just and compassionate future.